Major funding for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health, including Presbyterian in Charlotte and Forsyth in Winston-Salem, are affiliate heart hospitals of the Cleveland Clinic, consistently ranked #1 in the nation for heart care. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, proudly serving South Carolinians since 1946. And by Sonoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
You know, it is probably safe to assume that the last thing most people would want to hear is any kind of political analysis or partisan punditry around the recent elections. But consider this dialogue more of a discussion where we find ourselves now as a country and as a region in the Carolinas, more of a debrief than a debate. Welcome again to the most widely watched source for Carolina business and public policy. I'm Chris William, and the electorate has spoken. But what have they said? Is there some primal shift happening in this country, and what about our region? There have certainly been changes, but are they secular changes? And how will that play out? And if all of that is true, will there elemental transformation be taking place in our policies? We will begin in just a moment with our regular panel of politicos. Please stay with us.
Major funding also by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded November 16, 2012. On this week's program, Dr. Michael Bitzer of Catawba College, Dr. Robert Oldendick of the University of South Carolina, Dr. Karen Kedrowski of Winthrop University, and Dr. Susan Roberts of Davidson College.
Hello, welcome to our program. I almost don't know where to start here, but I want to make sure that this is not more dissecting of who's going to win the election. We already know who's going to win the election. You know, I'd really like to start with what happened in the election. Bob, you haven't been on the program before, so we're going to give you the first pitch here. What was this election about? Was there a mandate in here? Was this just Romney not winning? Was this Obama's ground game was better? Is there some deeper, embedded meaning here?
Well, I think what we're seeing is obviously more of the same given the results both in both houses of Congress and the presidency. And that's kind of surprising because if you think about only 23% of the people think we're on the right track and there's only 10% approval rating of Congress, usually when you have those kind of situations, what you have is throw the bums out. That didn't happen either, certainly not in South Carolina and at the national level. We still have, on Wednesday morning after the election, we woke up with what we have. And I think there's not just the polarization that we've talked about, but there's just also like I say, I don't think the way things are going, I like my congressman, I hate Congress, and also they're blaming the other side so that it's not our fault that things are on the wrong track. If that other side was either willing to raise taxes or if the Republicans say, well, if they were more willing to do spending cuts, then we'd get things on the right track. So there's still this lot of blame going out there as we go into what's going to happen now in the post-election period.
So anybody have anything different here? I mean, do you agree with Bob on this?
I would say so. I mean, I think in North Carolina in particular, I mean, South Carolina is pretty much in its kind of locked Republican control. I think North Carolina is verging on moving more towards a state like Virginia than necessarily South Carolina. Because,
and how is that, Michael?
Well,
exactly.
the demographics of the electorate is changing. I think the competitiveness of the state from 2008 to now, what we saw was North Carolina basically be the tipping point for either direction. I mean, Barack Obama won North Carolina in 2008 by 0.3%. Mm-hmm. Mitt Romney won it by barely 2%. If the campaigns are smart going into the future, both political parties see opportunities in this state, particularly among Latino voters that are growing in this state, and they could become a new kind of racial coalition with African American voters. white voters were only 70% of the electorate in this state, and their numbers are going to continue to decrease, much like across the country as well.
Well, I think when they talk about it, they've said the Republican Party has to do some soul searching. Is the Republican Party too old, too white, too male? And I think the change is, as Michael points out, with the Latino vote in North Carolina is going to be significant. It's increased, I think Pew said, tenfold since 2004. That's, you know, as they say about the weather, that's an impressive movement.
And when one candidate wins the Latino vote nationally 70-30, and it's very close in that ratio here in this state, and they went from 1% to 4% in 4 years, and they're only going to continue to grow. That's got to be a serious red flag for the Republicans.
Right.
I think it's important to note that there are the same trends that are happening in South Carolina, but I think South Carolina is a little bit behind where the rest of the country is. But we too have a growing Latino population, a growing, younger population. So those demographic trends are clearly happening in South Carolina. It's just going to take longer.
Let me take a sidebar here, because I wasn't going to go down this road yet. I wanted to wait a little bit later, deeper in the discussion. But this whole idea about the Latino voters, it seems to me that Hispanics were conservative, were Republican, Catholic, hard workers, had that whole conservative bent. What changed?
Well, I think one thing that the Obama campaign did in Florida especially is they parsed out their efforts to the Cubans, which are more conservative, to the Puerto Ricans, to the Hispanics, Latino votes, and that was very effective, instead of just saying one size fits all for the Latino vote.
The power of micro-targeting was taken to a whole new level by the Obama campaign. And
Versus 2008.
Well, they started it in 2008. They perfected it this year.
Okay.
And that kind of intense focus on a message that appeals directly to you versus a message that appeals to others is something that they have really worked to develop. The Republicans were playing catch-up this year, and I think the whole new data mining capabilities that campaigns are going to be using at the presidential and filtering down to state level races is going to change the way we look at campaigns and elections for a long time.
And I just want to mention one thing, because I read it twice to see if it was correct. Time magazine had an article about the data crunchers, and they said they could run 66,000 scenarios at night and then see the spit out the next day. And so they had it down. If this happened, then this would happen. I was fortunate enough to get to visit. One of my students worked in Chicago, so I saw the kind of warehouse floor bevy of people on computers looking, and it was quite extraordinary.
So let's talk a little bit about this advent of technology and polling. Oh my gosh, I think everyone was their eyes were rolling in their head from the different polls that were counteracting one another, contradicting one another. Poll of polls started to become more popular. What's your thought on polling, Karen?
Well, my thought on polling...
And by the way, let me just add this in. Are we getting better at polling?
Some people are. And I think what that means is that consumers really need to know what is a good poll and what is not. And need to be able to, know, I think, some fairly arcane information, like, is it a robopoll? Because a robopoll cannot call cell phones, and a growing percentage, and especially young people, are cell phone only as opposed to having landlines, and so then you end up oversampling certain kinds of population. You end up with a very unrepresentative sample. But I would actually really like to defer to Bob, who's far more knowledgeable about polling than I am.
If you look at a really well-done poll, despite the challenges of calling cell phones and privacy managers and people not answering the phone, the well-done polls, either the major media polls, all did a very good job in terms of projecting this election, and said we are getting better. We know how to weight data. We know how to get the right people on the phone, so that we didn't have the fiascos that we've had in 1936 and 48, and even the primary election in 2008 in New Hampshire. We're doing a much better job and putting more resources into it. So, yeah.
But Bob, how do you get the normal American that's already getting news on texts on phones that don't take the time to learn more about the issues? I mean, do we need poll advisors? How do we know which poll to believe? I mean, there's such a bevy of polls out.
Well, you really need to look at the methodology. A robo-poll, people will do things after they've collected the data to try to get things to match the electorate, but that's really not that well done. People that, particularly do they call cell phones, because it's now 50% of the people in South Carolina are either cell phone only or cell phone mostly, so they need to be included in your sample. And then the way the questions are worded, and do you do callbacks and get get a good representative sample. I think that there are things that we looked at as pollsters that you check those, you can say, I feel pretty confident that's a good poll.
Next week on this program, his name is Daryl Stott. He is the president and CEO, I guess president is probably more accurate, president of the South Carolina Technical College System will be here. And if you'd like to follow us, our Twitter feed is @CarolinaPolicy. That's @CarolinaPolicy, and our web address is carolinabusinessreview.com. Did Team Obama win this election, or did Team Romney just blow the election? How did this happen? What happened?
I think it was both. I mean, I think the organization, the ground game, the use of data just drove the Obama campaign to say, you know, even with the poll fluctuations, even with that disaster of a first debate, they saw the numbers, they saw the raw data coming in and said, we feel pretty good about states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. I mean, we started thinking, well, maybe there's something going on before the election. They were seeing stability. They were seeing a very constant presence in there. I think for the Romney campaign, a lot of it was trying to figure out what exactly they were going to try and appeal, and would the electorate be the same as in 2008? I think they thought that the electorate had matched what they had made in 2008, and it would be a slightly different, more advantageous because of the Tea Party insurgency from 2 years ago, and they just, I guess, badly misjudged what the electorate was going to look like.
How much did the Bill Clinton endorsement help?
I thought it helped a lot. I mean, I saw a list of things that had helped the Democrats, and one said Bill Clinton, Bill Clinton, Bill Clinton. And I think as a surrogate, I mean, he's a fascinating figure. I've never been in a room with him. I'd always like to see the magnetism. I think the energy that you didn't see on Obama's first debate, you saw in Bill Clinton, and you saw it all over the country. And he was really just a remarkable surrogate, bar none.
I think it also was helpful, too, in terms of energizing the base. Bill Clinton is an extremely beloved figure amongst Democrats, and even amongst independents who are old enough to remember the Clinton administration. They might remember that that was a period of prosperity. The economy was going great guns. The stock market was shooting up through the roof, and we were actually in a great state in terms of a budget surplus. So there was that subliminal message that, you know, the Democrats are the party of prosperity.
Right, and if you the question on who won versus lost, Susan mentioned earlier kind of the changing demographics of the electorate, and I think that it was a combination of Obama reading that correctly, that this was going to be to our advantage, and the Romney campaign not reading that and saying, well, this is going to be the same electorate, and losing badly in terms of the minority groups, in terms of, you know, Hispanics and Asian American voters, where we won the white vote but lost badly in the minority groups.
Yeah. And I think what Michael said about things were more stable than we let on, and that was, we always said, oh, the debates are going to determine it. Oh, the war on women, that's going to determine it. Oh, the 47%. When actually those changed the climate and the punditry, but there were other things underlying that, I think the data and the demographics that weren't changing.
Yeah, and how many people already had their minds made up before we even got into the debates. Absolutely. And before the second debate, 500,000 people in North Carolina had already cast their votes. So, I mean, people knew who they were going to vote for. They were just waiting to get out.
It seemed like Mitt Romney would hit something good like that first debate, and then say something bad, like he just did post-election here again. So I think I want to ask the question here, was Romney just not a good candidate here? Was he just not consistent?
I would say that Romney's biggest problem is that when he went off script, he ran off the road. He could not speak extemporaneously. So in the debates where he was very well prepared, and he had his talking points and he was not challenged, he did very well, and he came across very well. But that was a very controlled environment. And when he starts talking to his base and people have cell phones that he's not aware of or isn't thinking along those lines, and then he starts to say things that end up actually causing him a great deal of embarrassment. You know, and we saw it when he went to London during the Olympics, and then we saw the 47% comment, and then just recently the one about handing out gifts. And so he kept doing those things that reinforced actually the Obama playbook, which was that he was rich and out of touch. So when he said that the middle class was people with $250,000 a year, that also showed, I think, a fairly blatant disregard for basic statistics. And it was problematic for him.
And for someone who'd been in politics that long, there was some naivete. I mean, when he really didn't think, I don't think he thought that it was being mean toward women or disrespectful, but when he was fascinated and surprised that there were binders full of qualified women. And in the town hall, when he said flex time so women could go home and fix dinner, I really don't think he had any idea that he was saying anything that people might find offensive.
Or out of touch.
Or 1950s.
And nationally, if you think of the split really in the Republican Party, there's the more conservative the base and then the mainstream. And during the primary campaign, Romney was really forced to go to the right on issues like immigration. And then during the campaign, when he, I think, came back to his more natural or his own position, it was really more difficult for him to attack that way. And the inconsistencies came out, and it led to some of those flubs that we saw during the campaign.
But you know, both of you are from South Carolina, and South Carolina seems to be a great, is seemingly, how can I say this? A good experiment's not the right word. Really careful here. Oh my gosh, we're getting letters. I'm getting emails. I've got them before, received them before. But it seems South Carolina has done a pretty good job, certainly with the governor, of having a Tea Party that's very strong and a Tea Party that's pretty effective. So, when Bob, you just talked about the Republican Party. Has the Tea Party really upended the Republican Party? Is that what part of this is?
Well, it certainly showed itself during the primaries, and whether that's nationally or with individual races for the General Assembly in South Carolina, we saw that this being forced to take a little more conservative positions. When it comes to the general election, it really doesn't have that much of an impact in our state because we like to describe it as we're a solid 55-45 state. The Republican candidate is going to get 55% of the vote, and that's why all our constitutional officers are Republican, and that really hasn't changed much. And we saw it at the congressional level this time. In what happened for the state house races in most cases, we really didn't see much change.
But the element of the Tea Party also, it's not just about change. It's about some frustration and it's about anger, and that clearly showed up in North Carolina. First time since Reconstruction that the Republicans are running the joint. I mean, from the executive to the state to the. So how does that? Is this a secular change in North Carolina?
Well, I think if you saw those changes in the country about gay marriage, but we have to say Amendment 1 passed in North Carolina, and despite the fact that they were outspent, opponents of Amendment 1 spent twice as much as the people that were proponents. And I think that people are looking to see what does the McCrory administration bring. Will he rubber stamp everything that the Republican legislature gives him? Is he going to be the mayor of Charlotte that people
the moderate
like, the
mayor.
moderate mayor of Charlotte?
In his heart, he seems to be a moderate.
He seems to be a pragmatic, business-minded Republican. And that has always had a very strong presence in North Carolina, that kind of moderating, not really attached to the hardcore social conservatism that you tend to see not just in the Tea Party, but in the hard right component of the Republican Party. I think he's going to match up much closer to somebody like a Tom Tillis, who's potentially going to be the next Speaker of the House again from the past 2 years. The big question in my mind is how well does he get along with the state Senate? Phil Berger, a Republican, but a rural Republican who better reflects kind of that Tea Party insurgency and the social conservatism as opposed to a more pragmatic, moderate business mentality that Tom Tillis might bring.
And what's the risk here that the Republicans now, with the keys to the candy store, can take it all the way the other way?
Well, that's the real danger. I think Republicans in North Carolina have the opportunity to maybe start expanding into this growing diversity of the electorate. Pat McCrory actually did better on a lot of the exit poll numbers than Mitt Romney did. He has the chance to present that kind of moderate, pragmatic approach, but if he lets the extremes within the Republican Party dictate things, Democrats may just sit back and say, hang yourself, because that kind of backlash is not going to play well in a moderate-centered state like North
Well,
Carolina.
and McCrory got a good number of moderates that voted for
Exactly.
him,
And
and I think a healthy
independents.
number
Yeah.
of independents and people that were self-described liberals
Yeah.
voted for Pat McCrory, and there's a lot of ticket splitting.
And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but Walter Dalton didn't seem to be a bad candidate. Why did he not perform better here?
I think the lateness of
The Bev Purdue decision
the
on
Bev
not to run?
Purdue
Yeah.
decision, and
You
and
think tying to Bev Purdue maybe had some fallout?
It is probably the fact that for the past 20 years we've had Democratic governors, and I liken it to 2008 when the country was just basically sick of Republicans in control of the White House. They wanted change, and McCrory just happened to be the beneficiary, a double-digit win. But we go through cycles, and I think the Democrats had their run, and it was the end of the Democratic reign, and this was the natural consequence.
Well, and real quickly, Walter Dalton made, someone said, a desperate attempt at the end. It was not on television, but a kind of video YouTube ad that was a very desperate ad that used a lot of racial imagery that I was not comfortable with at all. And I think he wasn't the candidate. Pat McCrory's been campaigning for 4 years.
And plus,
Been
I get
running
the
for
sense,
4 years.
last word on that. I think it's a sense with Walter Dalton that is not his style.
No, I don't think it was his
that
style.
I think there was somebody giving him some bad advice there. In South Carolina, Nikki Haley has certainly are her numbers getting better?
No. No, and I think her main challenge is that she still has a large part of the population that registers that they have no opinion. Amongst the South Carolinians in our polls at Winthrop that have an opinion, she's better than 50%. But I think what's going to be interesting to see this play out, she has some enemies in the state legislature, and with the hacking scandal in the Department of Revenue that I am sure made us both vulnerable to identity theft, that could play out very badly for her, and
even
and
though
the
are they
administration.
hanging that on as a responsibility of her or a fault of her?
I think partially, and of course she's the person who's out in front with the news media. She's the one who's doing all of the news things. She's canceled trips in order to deal with this crisis, and it's a huge problem. And I think if they're looking for somebody to blame, yes, they can fire the head of the Department of Revenue, but then also some people might be looking for some other heads to roll.
Right. The public is going to be looking for, this is her responsibility. Somebody has to be held accountable for this, and they're not going to be able to even identify who the director of the Department of Revenue is. Now, there's 2 years before the next election, but if the story comes out where somebody's identity is actually stolen, and we have these horror stories about what happens as a result of this hacking, then it's going to be more of a story. So it has the potential to die down. It's certainly not going to help her. It's going to be somewhat of a negative. How much? We still have those 24 months to look at that.
We have a couple of minutes left, and I want to get in, staying in South Carolina, Bob. How much risk is Lindsey Graham in the next election cycle?
Well, I think he's certainly going to get a primary challenge. He's done some things that have been for South Carolinians and for the Republican Party particularly, seem to be more liberal in terms of climate change and his view on immigration. And there's some issues where I think he's going to face a primary challenge. And at this point in time, it looks like that would even be more of a threat to him than general election. I think that overall in the state, he has very high approval ratings, but within his own party is where the challenge is going to come.
When we're talking about the next election cycle, did I or did I not see an actual political ad already?
Unfortunately, yes. We have started the 2014 in North Carolina. The American Petroleum Institute has already released a call Kay Hagan and tell her you want energy independence kind of mantra. That's usually the beginning shots of the next campaign cycle. It only lasted a week. I mean, come on, guys, give us some time to recoup.
Now, will energy, and I know North Carolina within the last 12 months has legalized fracking. Where they take it, though, how they handle that is a different thing. So is that what that's going to be about? Will energy be a real issue in North Carolina in this next cycle?
I think so. I mean, the legislature is going to be interested in that. They've already laid the groundwork. They're probably going to move ahead on that. You're probably going to see tax reform as a major issue that the legislature is going to want to tackle. What about education policy, vouchers? I mean, the whole opportunity, having veto-proof margins now in the Republican legislature, along with the Republican governor, This is giving them wide open
Okay,
opportunities.
20 seconds. Can't answer that question, Susan. 20 seconds. Fiscal cliff, are we going to have an agreement, or will they kick the can down the road?
Well, I think they'll kick the can down the road a little bit. I mean, we had a
Okay.
speaker at Davidson who said it, part of it's a political ploy.
Okay, that's it. That's the last word. Thank you. Thank you. Good to see you, Bob. Welcome to the program. Good to have you here, Karen. Thank you for watching us. CarolinaBusinessReview.com. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Have a good weekend. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina, who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health, including Presbyterian in Charlotte and Forsyth in Winston-Salem, are affiliate heart hospitals of the Cleveland Clinic, consistently ranked #1 in the nation for heart care. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, proudly serving South Carolinians since 1946. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit CarolinaBusinessReview.com.